I have a really gross question for you. How many of you have ever used earwax on your lips?
You can tell the truth. We have one.
You've done it. Yeah. All right. Okay, I'll admit to it too. My name's Ada Hagen. I'm going to host this session of Microbiology Myths. I blog with ASM, and this is Dr. Michael Schmidt, and he's going to help give us some answers to microbiology myths. So, all right, the myth is that it's possible to use earwax to treat and or prevent cold sores. So I am a cold sore sufferer, and I found this on the internet, and it seems to be a really long-standing and widespread piece of advice. So I will say up front, I did try it a couple times. It wasn't as gross as I thought it'd be.
And it really, really works. So the question to you, the audience, this is an audience participation show, is why? Why does earwax, and we all know the agent that causes, cold sores, it's a herpes virus. So what's remarkable about earwax? What do you think's in there? Begins with an A.
Arginine. Antibodies.
Antibodies.
Which have arginine. All right. So, yeah, that's the thing, right? They have antibodies. Why?
They have antibodies, and they also have antibacterial and antiviral peptides that are going after the microbe responsible for the flare of the cold sore. You all acquired the herpes virus very early in your lives, and it just comes back because it can, and it does. And so a little bit of earwax will help control that pesky, nasty, sometimes ugly cold sore from coming back.
Oh, ugly. No.
No, you don't have one now. I mean, that's what people complain about.
No, that's fair. Well, they hurt too. So
And they do indeed hurt.
So it's maybe not as gross as we initially thought.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So here's another question then. We talked about herpes for a minute. Herpes makes you sick. The first time you get herpes, you have a strong fever, really, because your immune system's responding. So a big sort of question, especially for parents, I think, is what do you do with fevers? Do you let it run its course? Do you try to make someone hotter to get their fever to work well? Do we put cold cloths on their forehead? What do we do?
Depends. It's one of those depends answers. Well, we all heard the answer. You feed a fever, you starve a cold, or is it the other way around? You feed a cold and starve a fever. It's feed a cold and starve a fever. So if you think about it, what's actually going on? Viruses are ideally working at our set point. We know what our temperature set point is, 37 degrees. So as you develop the fever, your body temperature rises, and consequently what happens is the virus may no longer be working as efficiently as it once was. Now, the Sabin folks who developed the vaccine against polio took advantage of the fever response in the sense that the vaccine strain of polio has a temperature-sensitive mutant. And as the body responds to the vaccine, the temperature goes up and stops viral replication. And yet, you have now had all of the correlates of a God-fearing infection from which you have developed immunity. Your body had the real infection, and the temperature-sensitive lesion, once it hit that fever point, turned it off, and voila, you're now vaccinated against polio, which is why those of us who had the sugar cube vaccine against polio worked so well, and we were able to eliminate polio from the Western Hemisphere.
That's really awesome. I didn't know that scientists had taken advantage of fevers like that. Are there any other examples, thinking back, maybe even earlier in history?
Well, that's where the old adage comes from.
Yeah.
It's why you like fevers, the sweats. There was a Nobelist, a Nobel laureate, who was advocating giving someone malaria to treat infections. And the malaria therapy actually worked because, of course, they would get a very big fever. Now, you had pesky malaria at the same time, but, the devil is in the details.
Well, it's treatable, right?
Then, no.
Malaria.
He got the Nobel Prize in the 20s, not the ones coming up, the ones 100 years ago.
That would have been an interesting idea to have.
Yes.
All right. So just really quickly, can you clarify the difference between maybe having a fever and a heat stroke? Like, why?
Heat stroke, you go well beyond your set point.
Okay.
And then your enzymes begin to react badly to the higher temperature. And your body has many checks and balances to control that out of control fever response. And heat stroke happens to be one of them. And you feel pretty bad as the temperature increases. And of course, you sweat profusely, and then all of a sudden you stop.
Yeah.
And that's bad. When you stop sweating, that's bad.
I'll keep that in mind. So another question for you then, another myth is, and this is one I hadn't heard before. So if anybody else hasn't heard this, I'd love to know. You do not drink hot water that's from the hot tap. You use the hot tap to wash, use it to shower. You don't drink water from the hot tap. You only drink water that's come from the cold tap. Have you ever heard that before?
Oh, yeah. So why do you think you don't drink water from the hot tap? What do you suspect is coming out of the water? And it's not microbial. It's lead. Lead becomes mobile. And of course, many of our homes are in older cities. And of course, we have lead in our pipes. And of course, temperature mobilizes the metal. And consequently, you get a little bit of lead poisoning, which is not good. The other reason is microbial, because the microbes can indeed grow in the warmer water better. It supports the growth of the biofilm that is endemic in our piping systems, and consequently, you may get more bacteria in that water. And of course, there's a great debate about chlorine in our water supply, given the fact that we are no longer using copper pipes to transport potable water, and we're now using these newfangled plastic pipes. And so the chlorine concentration drops as a function of distance from the treatment plant. And so the water industry is very much looking at the amount of chlorine, because we don't like chlorine-flavored water. We've all been in a swimming pool, and you don't go there to drink. I mean, you spend $4, whatever it is here at the convention center, to get your bottle of water. But it tastes like water. So, we're worried about the microbes. And of course, our ASM president this year, Michelle Swanson, happens to work on Legionella. And we all know the story of Legionnaire's disease and that famous hotel in Philadelphia, in which the conventionaires turned on the shower, and got a slug of Legionella in their face. They inhaled it, and the consequence is they had a disease named after it.
Okay, so Legionella aerosolized in the shower, maybe you're breathing it in, that's how it gets into your lungs to replicate. Like, drinking Legionella, is that going to give me Legionnaire's disease?
Not always.
Okay.
Not always. You never say never in microbiology. Everybody in the audience knows that. If you say never, there's going to be 4 people out there raise their hand, say,
But odds are low, right?
Odds are low.
Okay, fair. So we don't drink hot water or tap water that's come from the hot water side because there's lead, because there's less chlorine, there might be more bacteria.
More bacteria.
Is there anything about newer pipes versus older pipes? Like, we don't have lead pipes anymore, but now we use this fancy PEX stuff.
We have fancy PEX
anything?
stuff, and we have fancy copper stuff with the PEX, because there's now copper joints. And then many hotels have resorted to copper washers just before the shower head in order to inactivate the biofilm. So there are many posters at this meeting about biofilms and how to retard biofilm growth. And there's probably somebody in the audience who can comment better than I about biofilms, which retards growth in biofilms in our potable water system. We've all had a bad beer in which the lines of the bar have been skunked, in which the yeast growing in the tap lines have skunked the lines. So it's just not water that we worry about. We worry about those mixed microbial end products that we routinely consume after 4 o'clock.
Okay, so cold water tap it is. All right. Another question, and this is one I heard from my mother-in-law.
Uh-oh. Mother-in-law questions.
Yeah. There's an old saying. I mean, I know that we've vaccinated against measles, and measles has all but eliminated from the U.S. That's been a bit of a problem lately, what with reduced vaccination rates. So this question is about measles, which is an upcoming issue for all of us, if not already. And the question is, do you avoid light when you have the measles? Can light make you go blind if you have measles?
The answer, unfortunately, is yes. And it has to do with the virus being able to interact with the retina, and it's because of how that virus behaves. Vince Racaniello is better than me to answer these questions, but it's a viral thing, and it's how it attacks, and it has to do with the life cycle of the virus and the overtaxing of the retina due to the increased light intensity. And of course, it's one of the hallmarks of the measles viral syndrome that's associated with that presentation. Most of us in this room were fortunately vaccinated by our parents. And so we don't actually have any real memory of measles, thank God. But unfortunately now there's a whole new series of measles victims out there because of the fact that measles is highly contagious. We're losing our herd immunity against it, and it's now spreading, and we're again discovering all of these strange things that the measles virus can do. So the short answer is vaccinate.
I think that's always the answer.
It's always the answer when the vaccines work, and they work.
So, you mentioned for a moment that one of the hallmarks of measles is measles in the eye. Can you elaborate on that? Like, is that one of the first signs of measles infections that you end up with, like,
No,
pink
you
eye?
get spots. You get spots.
Okay.
You know, the virus will develop the traditional clinical syndrome that you associate with measles, which is, of course, the exanthem, the rash that we all were taught. And again, you can also develop it in your throat. You can develop those evil Koplik spots that every poor dental student that I teach, you know, swears at me for showing them what a Koplik spot looks like. But, you know, when measles re-entered this hemisphere, the dentists had to protect themselves because it's highly infectious. And if you have a naive patient in your waiting room and you happen to have an infected patient in your waiting room, they're all going to be infected in your waiting room. And if your vaccine titer happened to have dropped, you could result in a mild case of measles as well.
Okay, fair. So spots.
Spots.
Avoid spots, vaccinate. But there are a lot of bugs that we still can't vaccinate against, right?
That is true,
Like-
unfortunately.
Mycobacterium tuberculosis, there's some vaccines, but efficacy is a bit of an issue. We don't vaccinate against Mycobacterium tuberculosis in the US. And there's an old disease that still crops up every now and again, leprosy.
Leprosy, yes.
So
The one that's in the Bible many, many times.
it is. So there's from my understanding, and I apologize if I'm wrong about this, there's a myth that has origins in Judaism. And it's part of a Jewish law that prohibits eating fish or with milk or meat and fish together. And the saying is that if you eat those together, then you'll get spots.
And it's just your classic allergy
Okay.
that you are developing. I personally have a fish allergy. So I develop great spots when I eat poached fish. And God knows what antigen I'm reacting to. But I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. And what they do to make stale fish taste fresh in the low country is they happen to soak it in milk. And that gets rid of all the mercaptans that give you that fishy taste. And when they poach it, they poach the milk proteins onto the fish proteins, and I became sensitized to that. And the consequence is now I have a delightful fish allergy that I get big spots if I just look at fish. So, you want to kill me? Show me a piece of salmon.
Okay, so the connection between that and leprosy.
Well, remember, this is well before Pasteur. Leviticus is an old book. It's in the Old Testament, not the New. And the leprosy loosely translates into rash, because that's effectively how leprosy manifested. And so it's probably an issue with the translation. There is frank leprosy, or Hansen's disease, that's caused by Mycobacterium leprae that happens to grow at a delightful 33 degrees, why it affects your fingertips, your nose, anything that's a bit cooler than your set point of 37 degrees. And it's a very challenging infection to clear because it's interacting quite nicely with our immune system, suppressing our immune system, so it can set up this reaction where it lives happily with us while it continues to disfigure us. And so it was recognized very early on in the Jewish tradition that it was indeed an infectious disease. And so the book of Leviticus is effectively looking at dietary restrictions. If you're familiar with Leviticus at all, you know that they also say thou shalt not eat shrimp, any form of shellfish. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, what do things like oysters eat? They're filter feeders.
Poop.
So they eat stool for a living. I mean, would you want to eat something that eats stool for a living? Many of us do. So consequently, that is part of their dietary restrictions. And they began to associate this empirically. They recognized when they got bad shellfish from an estuary that was downstream from their sanitary disposition locations, where you throw the bucket, they recognized that, if you did indeed eat the shellfish for your protein source, you had a greater likelihood of becoming ill. So, that got institutionalized and handed down generation to generation because oftentimes food poisoning would kill.
So let me make sure I've got all of this. Drinking meat and fish or milk and fish together is not going to give you leprosy.
No.
But if you have an allergy, you can have problems.
It could give you spots. Not leprosy, but just spots.
Okay. And you're talking about how these people empirically figured out, what types of foods are safe to eat from what locations. So do you think it's safe to say that, they were scientists before we had universities?
They indeed were. And often, our first scientists were women, because women were responsible for the procurement and the production of the food they put on the table. So much of this was passed down mother to daughter for generations, if not millennia. And in fact, that's how we figured out what potable water was, because it was passed down from mother to daughter. The women would go and collect the water from the well, the river, the stream. They would place it in a copper vessel, would inactivate the majority of the microbes in that vessel, and they appreciated that if they did that, their family didn't die from diarrhea. Because there is not one human on the planet that cannot diagnose diarrhea. We all know it when we see it. And we've all experienced it, at least once, maybe twice.
Okay, that's fascinating. And I think that means we kind of need to reframe when we use wives' tale, right? Don't we usually mean when we say, oh, that's a wives' tale, we don't
Correct.
believe that anymore. But wives' tales were pretty smart once upon a time, right?
Wives are still very smart.
Thank you.
I mean, remember, they were making this determination based on empiric knowledge, and their endpoint was death of their child. Because what kills more people on planet Earth today than anything else? Diarrheal diseases. And we're very much concerned about safe water globally. It's one of the global health initiatives is clean water. And diarrhea still kills. And we have to pay attention to it. So this wives' tale, I would argue it's a scientist's tale, and it just happened to be a woman. And it's through the own arrogance of men that we took the term wife and then reinvented it as scientists. And really, the original scientists were the women.
I accept that apology.
You accept that apology?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move into our lightning round really quick.
Lightning round.
So yes, no, maybe one sentence
Okay.
if you need to expand. Okay, so there's a myth that if you have an upset stomach, then you need to drink like flat soda, ginger ale, Sprite. Should we do that?
Yes.
Yes. Why?
Well, ginger is a natural substance that's been used for millennia. Again, the scientists, the women, figured this out, that ginger root was good for settling an upset stomach. And if you also think about it, you're feeding sugar, because you don't hear about feeding people flat diet soda. It's
fair.
the sugared beverages. And what you're doing is you're blooming the microbiome, so you're causing the microbes in the gut to overgrow the evil pathogen.
Okay, that was more than a sentence, but that was also fascinating. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Eating cheese before bed makes for poor sleep because there are bacterial and fungal psychoactive byproducts in cheese that give you lots of dreams and help you not sleep well.
The Brits did a study, and they said it was poppycock.
Okay, so it's false.
Yes.
All right. What if you go outside without a coat and it's really cold? Are you going to get sick?
There was a study. They put people in two rooms, one hot, one cold. They exposed them to rhinovirus, which is one of the causative agents of the common cold. Equal number of people got the cold, regardless of the heat.
It's good to know.
My mother would be upset.
Oh, I guess I can't use that excuse moving forward. All right, so there's another one about toothpaste. If you have spots, pimples, you can put toothpaste on them, and it's like the Windex, but on your sink. So like
The Greek wedding complex.
Yeah.
Well, we've all seen the toothpaste on our sinks. We've dropped it. It dries. And what you're effectively doing is you're dehydrating the pimple.
Okay.
And you're effectively drying it out. And what do all living microbes need to live? Water. And so you just dehydrate it. And it's principally now the most delightful name change I have ever seen is Propionibacterium becoming Cutibacterium. So Cutibacterium dries out and it grows in the hair follicle shaft on your face and dries out and dies.
All right. An apple a day keeps the doctor away.
Fiber is good. We all know about fiber, and you're effectively feeding the good microbes in your gut, the fiber, and they're effectively suppressing the bad ones.
So you'd give that a yes.
I'd give that a yes.
All right, so true. All right. Instead of an apple, what about a bulb of garlic a day?
Now, garlic is a wonderful product. It stinks like hell, and it works like one of our antivirals out there, Tamiflu. And in fact, it's one of the same derivative type compounds.
Okay.
So that is true.
Okay. I will.
Onions too.
Onions too? All right. So anything in the, what is it, the allium?
Allium family.
Okay. More garlic for me, please. Eating chocolate causes acne.
Nope, there was a study.
Okay.
The
And
Germans did that one, not the Brits.
if you have pink eye, you can go to bed and put a piece of raw potato over your eye. And
Yeah.
it helps cure the pink eye. True or false?
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay.
There are many causes of pink eye, so We'll give that a maybe.
We'll give it a maybe. Okay. Chewing tobacco juice on bee stings.
Nicotine is an analgesic, and so it's probably the nicotine that's effectively alleviating the pain.
Okay. Can you put vinegar on bruising and swelling?
It's an astringent, so it's going to effectively drive blood supply.
So that would make the swelling worse or better?
It could probably get it better. It's gonna contract at first, and then it's gonna effectively open it up once the vinegar has evaporated.
It'll be pretty smelly until then.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
They'll smell like coleslaw.
All right. Here's another one that I heard from my mother-in-law. And again, I guess we're still in the
You
lightning
need
round.
something to talk about with her.
You know, this was a great conversation starter. This was the best conversation I've had with her in a long time. So maybe we'll do this again next year.
We'll bring your mother-in-law.
Feverweed tea. If you have a fever, this is a tea you can make. There's a plant called feverweed. There's a longer name, I don't really remember, but that will somehow help reduce the fever, help you get better.
Yes,
Yes. Okay.
that indeed works, and it's the old story of aspirin, salicylic acid.
Okay. Very nice. All right, so we're going to open it up to the audience.
Oh no, we got questions.
I'm Jyoti from Nepal.
Welcome.
Yeah. I wanted to know whether using baking soda on your teeth would help with the whitening part.
Baking soda does indeed. It's a natural abrasive, so it will debride the biofilm that's growing on your dentifrice or your tooth surface, and it's not sufficiently abrasive to damage your dental enamel, so it does indeed work. You can cheat and make artificial whitening agents by putting a little hydrogen peroxide with the baking soda, but that may burn your gum line, so you may not want to do that.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Scott, and one of my students said they came across some literature that suggested, although it's very gross, we may actually want to consider picking our nose and eating it. And then the second one was another student who came up, said that he had actually researched this, and I probably should have researched it myself, but the idea that bathing might be contributing to, for some people, a higher incidence of skin infections because bacteria-related, ammonia-related bacteria tend to be somewhat protective in terms of innocuous or commensal bacteria. Anyway, those are the two.
To answer your second question, that is indeed correct. The ammonia oxidizers are indeed protective of our skin, and it's just the issue with the odor associated with it, which is why we have moved away from it, but it indeed is protective. About the picking of the nose and consuming it, I don't know what the consuming part will do, but the picking of the part, the danger there is if you break skin inside your mucosal surfaces, you'll actually introduce those microbes to your bloodstream, and you hope you have a perfect heart valve. Otherwise, you may end up with endocarditis, which you don't want. So picking is bad in general. The eating part, I don't know, because it's going to go through the stomach, and strep don't necessarily like stomach acid.
All right. Well, these have been some really interesting myths. Thank you for helping answer these for us.
Well, thank you.
I, for one, have learned apparently we need to bathe less. We can put earwax on our lips.
That too.
And we have women to thank for potable water.
We have
So-
women to thank for a lot of things
A lot of
besides
things.
potable water.
That's fair. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And this closes out Microbial Myths.
And we are out. Well, thank you.